Good evening, good evening. Sorry, we are starting just a tad bit late. Was making sure the PowerPoint was good to go. Just had a little bit of technical complications, but we're okay. We're okay now. So I hope that you all are coming in. As I see, we're joining whether on Facebook or on YouTube. This is our midweek Bible study here at Beulah Baptist Church. I'm so grateful that you're with us this evening as we continue to walk with Dr. Shanika Walker Barnes in her text, Sacred Self Care. This is a really, really good book, an enriching book. And it's been a blessing to me as we've walked with Dr. Rice through the first couple of weeks, and now we're going into week 3. And so if you have not purchased this book, this is just the cover of the book. I think on Amazon it's like $15, but very much so, very much so, very much so a really good text to help us center us as we think about our theme for this year: to believe, belong, and become. This is a text that will help us do that. So please, ma'am, please, sir, if you don't have it, pick it up. What I will also do is, we'll have some slides and we'll go through, so you'll get a chance to experience, and I actually experience some of the activities because we're going to walk through a couple of the activities tonight with the time that we have. So if you haven't, if you're on your computer, I know you're watching from your computer. So if you can maybe pull up a Word document or a notepad text file, or a good old handy dandy journal book like this. If you have one, get a journal book. One of these journal books will be helpful as we sojourn together with this book. These are super helpful as you continue to develop, as we continue to walk alongside with one another and continue to develop our relationship with God, with you utilizing this text of being better Christians and being better selves. And so if you have that, or if you have some scrap sheet of paper, I encourage you to get that tonight, because we will be doing some activities. So get your pen, some paper, scrap sheet of paper. Or if you have a journal book, get a journal book. Or if you have a Word doc, you like to keep Word doc, do that. Do whatever makes you feel comfortable as we get ready to sojourn with Dr. Walker Barnes tonight for our week 3. And so I'm pulling up here. So when you see me just kind of shift my head a little bit, I'm just trying to keep up with the feed of who is in the room with us this evening. All right. So we're about to get started here. All right, we're about to get started here. All right, I just wanted to get my slides up. So like again, please, as you're joining in, get you some pieces of paper or a pen and pencil with the paper, or if you have a notebook where you like to journal, get that. Or if you open up a Word document or a little text file, you want to do that as well as we get ready to get started. All right. All right, all right, all right. First, let's have a word of prayer. So good to see the Beulah family inside the chat here, and continue to let us know where you're tuning in from, and always it's a communal effort. This is communal dialogue, as we do best here at Beulah, and so I would love to just see, for those who are watching, just drop something in the chat there, as we continue to walk with Dr. Walker Barnes this evening for our Bible study. But let's go to God in prayer. Most gracious God, we're thankful for this opportunity yet to come, just to be with one another, but simply also to be with you. And so, God, we ask that you open our hearts, open our minds, so that we may hear you, so that you continue to prune and fashion us into who you have called us to be, and that the words that are lifted, not just on these slides, but in this book, will truly be words that continue to take anchor in our lives, so that we will become better, that we will know that we belong, so that we know that we can believe in who you are calling us to be, and most importantly, that we will become all that you have called us to be, all that you have deemed us to be. And God, we're thankful that most importantly, you have already deemed us good. And so with that, God, we give thanks, honor, glory, and praise. And so we ask that as we lift up communally tonight, as we lift up the scriptures, as we lift up activities, we ask that you allow these activities and these scriptures to really not to really press upon our hearts, and to not allow it to return void, but allow it to be transformational words that will do transformational things in our lives. So God, we give thee thanks, honor, glory, and praise. It's in your son Jesus' name we pray. And all God's people said, amen, amen, amen. So we're about to get started. Again, sacred self-care. And so what I'm also doing is I was looking for my pen. Okay, I see it. So I was looking for my pen. So what we're going to do is we're about to get started. I just want to close out of a couple things here, so we make sure we don't get any distractions. Here we go. All right, so we're about to jump in. Week 3 is practicing self-compassion. Week 3, this is what we're going to do, is pages 65 through 80, 85, I believe, or 60 to 85. Yep, 60 to 85. So if you're following along in the book, this is where we will center ourselves for this evening. 65 to 85, right? Practicing self-compassion, okay? And so what we will be walking through tonight are a couple of things, not everything that is offered on these pages from 65 to 85, but we're going to pull and have some conversation and dialogue and some activities, okay? So just to open up, what we're going to open up with is what she acknowledges in the opening of week 3 about practicing self-compassion. And that is this quote here: if self-care is so simple, why is it so hard to commit to it? If self-care is so simple, then why is it so hard to commit to it? And I think that is something so poignant, because oftentimes when we hear about self-care, and as we've already discovered some of the elements of self-care with Dr. Rice, from financially being able to take care of ourselves to in terms of also eating, right? All of these things and ways of being able to take care of ourselves holistically. We acknowledge that self-care is important. We acknowledge that it is not something that should be put on the back burner, but we often we often don't really think about the ways in which we'll start something, right? We'll start a fitness journey, we'll start a journaling journey, we'll start these various practices, right? But then we get off, right? And so why is it so hard to commit? Why is it so hard to commit? I have this diagram here, calling it the resistance loop. And I'm sure some of us can attest to this, right? That we start with deep exhaustion, then we move with an attempt, because at that point of deep exhaustion, we know we need to fix something. We know that something's not right. We've been doing too much. We need to dial it back in, right? We've been caring, maybe we've been doing a little bit too much care for everything around us and not enough care for ourselves. So we have those indicators, right? Deep exhaustion being one of them. Then we attempt at that care. We attempt to try to alleviate, right? To alleviate what is keeping us exhausted for so long. And then we may attempt, maybe a day goes by, 2 days go by, 3 days go by, 4 days go by, you may get a week. And then the next thing you know, that attempt then begins to kind of fall, because self-judgment or guilt or something else kind of throws us off, right? And then at that point, we just abandon the care. And then we return to that state of exhaustion, only to continually start that cycle again. And I can attest that I've been in that space. And I actually just saw a video on social media. I think it was either yesterday or the day before, even as I was thinking about this lesson. The guy was actually talking about how we often, want to do these things of care, these processes, right? But the moment something happens, right? The moment something gets us off kilter, the moment something does something different, where it pushes us differently, then the whole entire process system drops and fails. Right? It's because it's not built. We're not. That system isn't built to kind of withstand, right, something that is unpredictable. And I think many of us can kind of attest to that. I'm sure some of us, I think all of us at some point may have tried to say, we got this new year, new me. We have this new journey. We're going to do certain things at the beginning of the year. And now here it is, as we come to April and May. And, we're back having to restart that loop, right? Because of the fact that now we're back to acknowledging those are the things that we need to do. And so the things become for us is to acknowledge that at some point we also have to keep in mind that part of self-care is being able to also practice self-compassion. And part of being able to practice that self-compassion allows us to know that whenever something may come up in that right attempt to care, that we may just be able to give ourselves some grace and get back up and really just keep trying, right? To really get back up. Whether it's maybe we dedicated and said that we want to read a book a month. We may get off 1 month, but we're going to get back up and start it again. We may say that we want to cut back, right, on certain foods that we eat. And we might have had a slip up, but then we get back and we continue to keep going, right? Because part of what that self-compassion does is allowing us to say, it allows us to give us space to truly just be who we are and simply are human. It gives us space not to have to perform and be performative just because we're trying to create and accomplish this process that we're attempting to do. But ultimately, it allows us to be, it allows us to acknowledge that sometimes we may drop the ball on certain things, or some things may not go as planned. But that also we're allowing space for that, right? So that our processes and things don't take such a hit to where it knocks us off kilter, and then we wind up having to try to figure things out to get back on, right? It's always about getting back on, right? Even as we're learning, I can even remember, and I'm sure a lot of us, for those who know how to ride, who remember riding bicycles and learning how to ride bicycles. You started off with a tricycle, right? And then you moved up to the bicycle. But in those moments, you had to learn sometimes that maybe falling off, sometimes you would fall off, or you may wind up leaning, learning how to press the brakes, all part of the process. But you also would know that ultimately you saw yourself in that end goal. And this is the same here, is that we want to really allow that attempt at care to not fall to self-judgment, right? But we want to be able to create a new loop that allows us to say it's not self-judgment, but we give grace there, right? We give grace there so that we don't abandon the care that we need, but that we allow ourselves to embrace the care that we still desire and that we still need, because it's very much so important. All right. And so what we want to do is, we know that if self-care is so simple, why is it so hard to commit to it? But we know maintaining good self-care requires loving ourselves enough to dedicate time and energy to caring for ourselves. And part of that also too is giving that grace, is giving that self-compassion. That's us loving ourselves enough to say, you know what, I might have dropped the ball, but you know what, I need to do this for me. And I know I need to do this for me. And we've all been there, where we know that our bodies, if you're not careful, our bodies will keep count of the number of times and when life has this way of happening. We sometimes can push things in the back of our head, but our bodies don't forget. And so we have to be intentional about loving ourselves enough to dedicate that time and energy to really truly care for ourselves. And so this brings us to really one of the first things that we're going to do together, right? It's one of the first things we're going to do together tonight. And that is a little self-reflection. So part of caring for ourselves, how does self-care show up as self-compassion, right? We'll look at Luke 10:27, which is the Lucan version of the Golden Rule, as we all know, and as we're all familiar with. But I will read it in our hearing tonight. And we know that all too well. If the moment I start saying it, you will know it. And it reads thusly: He answered, he being Jesus, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself, right? Um, and so part of that is wondering, like, we have this commandment, but and what we'll see is as we continue to go into our next slide, we'll begin to talk about how this particular, in the way in which Luke kind of pulls that golden rule there, and then he supplements it afterwards with the parable of the Good Samaritan. And so it's quite interesting how Dr. Walker Barnes kind of pulls and lets us know, talks about compassion in that way, and how that parable really, for us, really encourages us and reminds us about what compassion does for us. But and as before, right before we get there, though, what I want to do is that we also acknowledge that caring for ourselves isn't just what we do for ourselves; it's also how we think and feel. I gotta say that again. Caring for ourselves isn't just what we do for ourselves, also rather it is also how we think and how we feel about ourselves. Self-compassion begins with how we speak to ourselves. Self-compassion also begins with an awareness, with that awareness of how we speak to ourselves, how we think about ourselves. And so here we are with our first activity. Without thinking, don't put too much thought in it. Take that sheet of paper, take that journal, or take this Word document you may have open. And when you think about yourself, what's the first word or first words that come to mind when you think, when you reflect on yourself, when you think about yourself? What are the first words that come to mind? And what are the first feelings that come to mind? What are the feelings that come to mind? What's the first word or words that come to mind? And what's that first feeling that comes to mind? I'm not going to ask, because again, I know this is a personal reflection, so I won't necessarily ask us to share, but just let me know. Once you have that, just jot it down, and hopefully, maybe at some point throughout the night, we'll be able to meet that where we are. So what's that first word? What's that first or first words, a group of words, or what's the first thought you have when it comes to thinking about yourself? All right, write that down. Let's write that down. As you see, I have I also too have my own pieces of paper. And I also have a journal as well. So open this one here. So as you see, like I said, going into this journal. So just take, like I said, take your sheet of paper for those who are joining with us. This is the first activity we have for tonight. What's the first word that comes to mind, or words that come to mind when you think about yourself? And then, and what's that feeling? What do you feel? What do you feel? What are the words and what do you feel? And be honest, because part of being able to take care of yourself is also being honest with yourself. If we're not honest with ourselves, then we cannot appropriately take care of self. We have to be honest in these moments with ourselves about how we feel or what we may think. All right. All right. So we're gonna hold that. Um We're going to hold that. We're going to hold that as we get ready to move into our next activity. Okay. All right. So we're gonna get some thumbs up or some thumbs up in the chat or some dones or complete. Just let me know that you finished this activity, and we're gonna go ahead and go to the next one. Okay. All right. All right. So as we continue on in this part of the week, or as you continue in this in part of the of week 3, if you once you get the book, you will that will be your first introduction, right? That will be your first introduction, is talking about practicing self-compassion and loving your neighbor as yourself. And what she does with the book is she points out for us that the golden rule, right, is coupled with the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's the parable of the Good Samaritan. For those who are not familiar, I encourage you, because we're going to be pressed for time. I'm going to give you a high level cliff note version of this text. But I want to encourage you to read Luke 10, and it starts with verse 25. It starts with verse 25 and it goes to verse 37. Actually, for what I'll do is we're gonna read a little bit of it. We'll read a little bit of it because I do want to make sure you get context. That's also important. So but in your own time as you're walking through this text, she brings it up in the book. And so you encourage you to read it. For those who don't have the book quite yet, this is a good text for you to meditate on. It's a good text for you to meditate on as you think about compassion and suffering with. So think about compassion, and she tells us in the book that compassion means, right? It means to suffer with. It's translated to mean to suffer with, right? And this parable about the Good Samaritan, right? About who is our neighbor, who is our neighbor. That particular text is about compassion. And so, what does it mean to suffer with, right? And she writes, compassion allows us to connect to the feelings of others, to respond to their suffering with feelings of kindness, and to desire that their suffering be done, be ameliorated, right? Be alleviated, right? Compassion also guides us to interact with other people in ways that do not cause them pain and suffering. Right. So let's keep that in mind as we just read a little bit of this parable. And it starts as this. But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" And Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by again on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. And so he went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend." Jesus then asked, "Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" And Jesus said, "The one who showed him mercy." He said, "The one who showed him mercy." And then Jesus said, "Go and do likewise." Do you not hear a famous parable that is also a fun fact? It's only found in the Gospel of Luke. Only found there in the Gospel of Luke. And we hear, right, of how one passes by the Levite. We hear, right, of how another passes by, who saw this guy pleading, right? The priest and the Levite saw him literally with, looking, hanging on for dear life at the hands of robbers, and it took a Samaritan. Why is that important? Because Samaritans and those who were of Jewish descent did not get along, right? And so here we are seeing that Jesus uses this parable to show that the one who does not get along is the one that the one who you would deem is not does not get along with you because of your ancestry, the one that you have been taught socially, right, to respond to in negative ways and to almost vehemently hate, right? The one that you've been taught to socially have xenophobic tendencies, right, to respond in negative ways to, is the one that winds up taking a pause, right, to see about you, right? That's the kind of level of compassion that Jesus is referring to. And that is also the kind of compassion that we ought to be able to show ourselves, right? Because the reality of it is some of us, as we just did that last exercise, maybe in this season is feeling good about ourselves. And that's great. And maybe there's some things that you think about that you may want to work on, because we all have things to work on. But there may be some of us who are out there this evening who did not write and he did not speak of compassion about yourself. That's why also too, sacred self-care is important, because we must extend that same compassion to ourselves. When we find ourselves exhausted by life, can we allow ourselves to stop long enough to see about what we have going on, right? Compassion, there's a desire for healing. With compassion, there's a desire to connect and respond. And sometimes we just have to take a break and a pause to connect with ourselves. One of the ways in which I connect with myself all the time, I go for a walk every morning. That is my time to me to think. That is my time for prayer. That is my part of my time for prayer. That is my time where I listen to scripture. That is my time where also sometimes I just pause when I walk and just check in with myself. Sometimes you have to figure out how are you responding. But then ultimately also to knowing that compassion means to suffer with, like, it's to enter, right? And the reality of it is we cannot exhibit and we cannot sustain continuously giving ourselves to everything else, including the neighbor who might be to the left or to our right, if we do not show compassion to ourselves. And so now the question is, right? Here's a question I want you to write down. Here's a question I want you to write down. What prevents us from extending that same compassion to ourselves? And we can have a conversation about that too. I'm going to throw that in the chat for us too, so that you can have that. But that is the question. What is that thing? What prevents us from extending that same compassion to ourselves, right? What prevents us from extending that same compassion to ourselves, right? And I'm curious, what are some things that come to mind when I ask this question? Let's throw some answers in the chat. Let's have dialogue. What do you think prevents us? What are some things that prevent us from being able to do that to ourselves? I often know that one of the things that sometimes come up is that we lack confidence, right? We don't have confidence, right, to know and to believe in the gifts that God has given us, or we don't have the confidence to know that we're equipped and more than equipped to be in the position or the space that God has placed us in, right? Some of it, maybe it's imposter syndrome, right? That prevents us from extending that compassion because we see ourselves as less than in some ways, right? What are some other ways? Mm, Doing things for others. Sometimes doing things for others can prevent us. Absolutely. Sometimes doing things for others because we wind up just giving everybody else and everything else the best of us, and then we wind up leaving ourselves with very little. I like that. I like that. What else? What else? Are there any others in the chat? So, what I want to do now is let's talk about some compassion practice activities that she kind of also highlights in the book for us. But these are some things. Yeah, sometimes the matters of the heart. I like that. I like that. Someone placed in the chat that sometimes the matters of the heart may hit differently, right? Because there may be where you show more compassion in a certain environment or a certain experience or to somebody, but that's not reciprocated in those ways, right? That can be very disjointing. And so what I want to talk as we talk about some of these things, as we come and recall to mind some of those things, let's think about like these are 4 ways to extend that compassion to ourselves today, right? Give yourself a compliment, right? Like I said, we may have wrote something down where we did not necessarily reflect. It did not reflect our it did not reflect it may not reflect where we want to be or how we, it may also ever just reflected honesty about how we may feel with ourselves. But even in spite of that, let's give yourself a compliment. Another thing that we do is allow difficult emotions and bodily sensations to exist without judging or shaming ourselves for them. That's a good one, right? Because sometimes the first thing we get so conditioned that we want to have this automatic response about how we feel about something, whether we're angry, whether we're sad, um, uh, you know, um, we will or quick to be like, oh, or maybe, we'll be quick to look and like, well, we'll try to go ahead and do that quick, like, 1080. We'll try to do that complete 360, that right, that turn around, that complete all the way turnaround, right? Like that reverse, right? To say, well, although angry, I know we shouldn't be angry. Da, da, da. No, like sometimes we just need to sit with it, right? Instead of rushing to get beyond the emotion, sometimes we need to sit with the emotion, right? Sometimes we need to be able to name how we feel, name what's coming up, right? But not necessarily um, dismiss it. And what I wanted to do is I was trying to pull up the name of this app. There's an app that I just pulled up that I have on my phone that I think is a really good app. It's called How We Feel. It's called How We Feel, and it's a beautiful app where you can check in, and it starts off. And I was going to pull this up where you can see it. 1 second, I want to pull this up. 1 second. There we go. All right, here we go. So I didn't want my phone to tap out. So if you see here, it starts off with just 4 areas where you may feel. And then as you tap on one, let's say, low energy and pleasant, right? You begin to see all these words that pop up, right? You begin to see all of these words that pop up, and you can move around the quad. A really nice, intuitive app that's simple and free to use. There's no cost to it or anything, but it's a great way just to check in with yourself. It's a great way to check in with yourself to truly be like, this is how I was feeling. The other cool thing about it is you also can see how you progress and how your moods shift, right? And what I appreciate also too about this app is that it allows you to be able to sometimes sit with how you feel without judging, right? Without shaming. Um, and I love this, like being able to sometimes have to speak truth in spaces where it's not taken out of context or in the wrong way. Yes, absolutely. And that's being able sometimes you have to you assess, right? You assess the context, you assess what's going on in the room, And then you exactly like what you said, like you find ways of being able to say, hey, speak your truth. But you speak it in a way that is authentic to you. You speak it in a way that's authentic to how you feel. You speak your truth in a way that does not demean how you feel, right? And also, but you also do it, and you also do it, and you trust, right, that in this space that when you share, that again, that it's not heard in malice, it's not heard, but it's actually heard because of this is what you're experiencing, right? I love that. I also wanted to say about that app, how we feel, is that they also have little places where you can just jot notes about how you feel, so it's a great way. Sometimes you may not have the words. That's a great app that you can just have that you just like, hey, this let me check in with myself. This is how I feel. It's a great way to check in, right? Sometimes you just need to take a break during the day. And then if not, take a break, journal about what you did. Journal about how it felt. Pay attention to any resistance. Pay attention to that inner me. Pay attention to what's coming up about showing yourself that level of compassion, right? That is key. Part of that too is being able to watch our words, right? So as we even talked about being able to share our truth, is that we also have to watch our words in a way of what we also say to ourselves, right? For James 3:8-10, I have it on the screen here, but no one can tame the tongue. A restless evil full of deadly poison. With it we bless the Lord and Father, and with it we curse people made in the likeness of God. For the same mouth comes a blessing and a curse. My brothers and sisters, this ought not be so. Um, that is a very powerful passage. And I'm going to put the name of the app in the chat as well, because someone asked how we feel. How we feel is the name of the app that I made mention of. Okay, how we feel. But no one can tame the tongue, right? Restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it, we bless the Lord. That duality of what comes out of our mouth, right? And so it makes us think about how are we using our words to ourselves, right? To people and to ourselves, right? How do we use our words? And ultimately, I really should have put, how are we using words to ourselves, right? How are we speaking about ourselves? How are we? How are we? Are we pronouncing life over ourselves, or are we consistently beating ourselves up? Are we building ourselves, or are we tearing down? Like the word of God, human language has creative power, and this is from the book. We use words to form and maintain relationships, to build and sustain institutions, to establish the laws that organize our societies. That's the power of language, right? It's important. Even as we think about the ways in which, even how, we always say, right, on Sunday in, Sunday out, week in, week out, that sometimes you may be the only Bible, the only version of God that people see, and sometimes what you will say and how we will say things sometimes can disjoint, right? What people are experiencing, or what they think. It may rub, right, not in a good way. And so more importantly, the thing is, how are we creating this duality even about ourselves, where we're not really speaking kindly of ourselves, you know and we've all been there, done that. We mess up. We may beat ourselves up for it, and we whether it's even or whether it's dealing with a coworker, whether it's dealing with a family member, a spouse, right? The list goes on and on. And we beat ourselves up for it. But we also have to be reminded, again, like I said, the body remembers. And so we have to, in as much as we so quick can be quick to do that, we have to shift our mindset, right? To know that we have to extend ourselves that compassion, to know that we are not our mistakes, right? That we are not to be tearing ourselves down in that way, right? We're not in the business tearing down that what God has already deemed good, that we ought to build ourselves up, right, in a way that allows for us to see ourselves the way in which God sees us. All right. And so what she does in the book is she begins um, to think about, as we think about watching our words, she begins to talk about befriending your inner critic. And then she also begins to talk about a some language, right? And she calls it should language, right? She calls it should language. Um, she calls it should language, where we always say what we should be doing, or what we how self-talk becomes a form of should messages, where the things that I should do, the rules I must follow, even the relationship that I maintain, some of these messages come from external sources. Others, though, I've created, often unintentionally and unconsciously. These messages are rarely true, and they set unrealistically high bars by which I judge myself. I love that, right? Because she says should messages are hard to control and are often buried within our consciousness, right? So let's take a look at that, right? And then we're gonna compare it with some compassionate language. I should be doing more. I know I could be guilty of that. My body's telling me I'm tired. You need to take a nap. And I was like, no. The first thing I tell myself, I should be doing more, instead of honoring the fact that I need to be sitting down and resting because I'm already doing enough. All right. I should be better at this. I should be a lot farther ahead than where I am. All right. I should have known better. Because the reality of it is not the essence of shouldn't have known better. The truth of where that is actually I did not want to get hurt. Right. I should be stronger. As if maybe possibly you're more than strong enough. May not be where you ought to be, right? But you are definitely strong enough because you've already survived, right? And so we have to be careful, because part of being able to acknowledge that we do that, and we probably don't even know oftentimes where we get it from, and that's what she's really pointing to, and it's so tangible and so pertinent in our lives. And so oftentimes, this is where I always encourage. I myself believe that I feel like all of us, if at any point, should be able to have a therapist that we can rely on, so we can unpack, because sometimes we just need that objective view to be able to unpack, like, well, where is this coming from, right? Being able to do that internal work, right? Because sometimes we need to know, not sometimes, all the time, we need to know, where is that should language stemming from? Where is that coming from? What is it that you were lacking? And therefore life has found its way, whether by way of a person or a family member, has seemingly created that void and created that trauma. And so, like, or an experience at school, or an experience at the job, right? Experience um, uh, with a friend, or an experience with an ex-partner, like all of these things, can take and add to ourselves, right? um and if we're not careful, it just all begins to show up with should language. I should be doing more, or I should be better at this, because you're comparing yourself, right? We don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. So we need to be able to give ourselves compassionate language, to say, instead of I should be doing more, I'm doing enough, right? I'm learning and I'm growing. I did the best I could in this season, right? I am allowed to feel, right? So whenever we have that should language, that should talk come and creep in, we have to replace it with compassionate language. Replace it with compassionate talk. All right. So instead of I should be, no, I am learning, right? I should have, I did enough, and I would, I will do more to, I will finish it tomorrow, right? Um, Replacing that should, being mindful of that should language is super important, because again, it's how we're viewing and how we're thinking about ourselves. All right, let's go to the next one. So with that, right, that compassionate talk of self, we are affirming our enoughness, right? For in Genesis, it was God saw that all he had made and it was very good. All right. Self-talk can tear us down with messages of judgment, criticism, and fear, shaping how we see ourselves and limiting to what we believe we deserve. For one way to tap into the positive power of self-talk is to use affirmations. Affirmations is an intentional way of speaking and reminding ourselves of our self-worth, right? It's not, and she goes and talks about affirmations when we're gonna, and she gives us a particular verse that we're gonna recite and read together. And she's very cognizant that oftentimes where we use this way of affirmation is that sometimes we will take things and run with it, and we've seen it all on social media all too far, all too many times. But we will take something and run because we're affirming, and there are oftentimes we're affirming some various natures or character some character flaws of development, right? We will overcompensate using affirmation, right, to affirm some things that we probably should really unpack and be intentional about reflecting on. So we don't want to do that, but what we do want to do though is we do want to ensure that we are affirming ourselves with intentional words that remind us of our worth and God's love. We definitely should do that, right? We definitely should do that on a consistent basis. Um, we have to be intentional about using affirmations to remind us simply that we are good, to use affirmations to remind us that God saw fit for us to be, that we were created and saw fit for us to be made in God's image, and that in and of itself we are good, that we have and who we are is enough, period. For affirmations can help replace the negative messages that we give ourselves or that we've heard from others, and renewing our minds with truth. Right? That's very important. That's very important as we think about, right? Again, the ways in which we're talking about ourselves, the ways in which we are thinking about ourselves, we have to affirm our enoughness. And the way we do that is through affirming ourselves, affirming that God has already affirmed us to begin with. And we're going to stand on that. We're going to stand on that, right? And so, what I want to do now is I want to read from John, not John, James. Sorry, James. I saw John because I was looking at the Gospel of John. But I want to open up to the book of James, here in the New Testament. Here, all of my pages are sticking together as they should. Let's see. Let me see if I can find my other Bible here. My pages. Here we go. Much easier to flip through. All right, so let's go to the book of James. I'm sorry, I did it again. The book of James. The book of James. We're gonna just hang out with James for just a couple of verses. James chapter 3, verses 2 through 3. Right. I'll just go ahead and restart. Now, not many of you should become teachers, my brothers and sisters, for you know that we who will teach face strict judgment. For all of us make many mistakes, but any who make no mistakes in speaking is mature, able to keep the whole body in check with a bridle. But if we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. Or look at ships, though they are so large and driven by strong winds, yet they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. For all of us make many mistakes. Anyone who makes no mistake in speaking is mature, right? But able to keep the whole body in check with a bridle. But if we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we guide their whole bodies. So it's interesting that even how he talks about, right? And this is James chapter 3. And if you read the rest of the chapter, you'll begin to see that he's really talking about the tongue. And he's using these different examples and metaphors for how this small thing can guide the rest of the momentum of the bigger thing that is doing, whether, again, like if it's a bridle for a horse or if it's a rudder on a boat, right? Being able to navigate and to maneuver that small thing. And so much so is our tongue, right? And how we affirm our enoughness, right? Guides how we think and how we move about ourselves and how we, again, even engage with the rest of those around us and those we've even been called to, right? So we have to be intentional. We have to be intentional to know and stand on the affirmations that we are good, right? Let's go on to moving beyond self-judgment, which is one of the next components that you will discover in this week of the book. And I encourage you from this week, if you order the book and you start this week, and then even we'll move into next week, right? We recognize, we release, and we embrace. We recognize, we release, we embrace. We recognize, we release, we embrace, right? We recognize our inability to speak mercy towards others is rooted in our inability to do it for ourselves, right? And so now we're acknowledging, we start with acknowledgement that this is where we are, but then we release. We judge others with the same harsh measures in which we judge us, and we release that which is what we've been already internalizing about ourselves. But we also, at some point, can release to know that we don't have to do that. We can release to know that we actually can actually allow ourselves to have a level of self-care, have a level of self-compassion, have a level of awareness to know that our enoughness of who we are is enough, right? And therefore we can embrace the freedom that comes in learning to accept and love ourselves for who we are, treating ourselves with the mercy and compassion that Christ embodied. That's what we're gunning towards. That's what we're aiming towards as we continue to navigate through this. That part of that, there's some things we need to let go so that we can embrace the totality of who we are, right? That's the movement. We recognize, right? Which is what we were doing in that first activity. As you saw, everything is building up, right? That first activity, we can just recognize, we're just recognizing, right? We just recognizing what it is that we need to, what it is that we're saying about ourselves, right? And then we move, right, and acknowledging what should language, and then acknowledging that some of that we need to release and introduce, right, to ourselves, right, compassionate language that allows us to know that we are enough so that we can embrace the freedom and liberation that God already has for us. To embrace and know that the mercy and compassion that Christ embodied is for us to also endure. It's for also us to embrace, also for us to enjoy, right? We release, we recognize, we release, and then we embrace, right? We recognize, we release, and then we embrace. I think that's good for us this evening. And the way in which we do that here is a beautiful affirmation. A beautiful affirmation here that is found in the book of Psalms 139. I'll just put the chapter up there for you. But very much so, it is the very verse where Psalms 139. Oh Lord, you've searched me and known me. You've known when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts far from away. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high that I cannot attain it. For where can I go from your presence, Spirit? Where can I go from your Spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle it to the farthest limit of the sea. Even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. Surely darkness shall cover me, and the light around me become night. Even in darkness is not dark to you, for the night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. Let me see. For it was you who formed you in my inward parts. It was you who knitted me together in my mother's womb. For I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works that I know very well. For I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. That is our affirmation activity, that I am beautifully, I am fearfully, I am wonderfully made. I am the image of God. We read that Psalms 39 verses 1 through 14. So you can know there the psalmist is really declaring that there is nothing like God knowing you, because God has created you. And as a result, you're good. And so I invite you to speak this verse. Speak this verse as an affirmation. Keep this verse as an affirmation. Settle it in your spirits as an affirmation to know that you're fearfully, that you're beautifully, wonderfully made, and you're made in the image of God. Psalms 139:14. And with that, as we get ready to come up on our hour, I invite us to take a moment of just quick reflection, to sit with what we've heard, to sit with what we felt, to sit with what we experienced, because today we have decided to release, we've decided to reflect, but most importantly, to reflect, to release, but most importantly, to embrace, to know that I am fearfully and I am beautifully and wonderfully made, because I am made in the image of God. And so, with that, we ask God to speak into our hearts. And with that, we say this prayer, that Dr. Walker Barnes wrote: by acknowledging God of compassion who cares for us with the tender love of a mother nursing her young. Help us to care for ourselves with the same mercy and gentleness that you offer us. Help us to speak words of maturity, wisdom, and kindness towards ourselves. Let our cups so overflow with self-love that we're able to spread it to others, encouraging them to love themselves as your divine image bearers. Amen. Well, friends, I am out of my time. I thank you for yours. I know we just went a little bit over just because we started a little late, but I just want to encourage you this week to embrace self-compassion, to embrace self-love and loving self, extending compassion towards self as a way of sacred self-care, so that wherever you are, you will not only be able to have reflected on that, but you can release any of the things that you have realized that is dimming your enoughness, that's dimming who you see yourself to be in God's eyes. But that you walk boldly and you walk confidently in knowing that you have been fearfully and wonderfully made. Amen. Amen. Thank you for your time this evening. And I hope you have a blessed rest of the blessed evening, a great and amazing week. Also, just a reminder that we have leadership training coming up this Saturday. Leadership training coming up this Saturday at 10:30 a.m., where we will be diving into the book, The Hard Things About the Hard Things. So our leaders are required. So please, ma'am, please, sir, we'll see you 10:30. And for those who I've seen on the call, I hope that you just welcome and remind me of how fearfully and wonderfully made we are, right? And so I appreciate the time that we shared together. Don't forget, leadership training is this Saturday, May 2nd. And then also don't forget, as we get ready to come up on Mother's Day weekend, that we have a beautiful opportunity to be the hands and feet of Christ, as we will attempt to bail out women who have been incarcerated for nonviolent offenses. We are pooling together resources so that we can be the hands and feet of Christ on Mother's Day weekend. So if you have any other questions about that, just feel free to email me at mbailey@beulahATL.org. Again, mbailey@beulahATL.org, and I will get you in contact with the person who's leading that effort for Mother's Day weekend. And I hope to see you all, for those who are leaders, on Saturday. If not, I hope to see the rest on Sunday at 10:30 a.m. Y'all be blessed and have a beautiful, beautiful evening. Take care.